Senator from Texas.
I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of S-247 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. I further ask that the bill be read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection? The Assistant Democratic Leader.
On behalf of the ranking member, Democratic member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Pat Leahy, and myself, I do object.
Mr. President.
The objection is heard. The Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of S-2302 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. I further ask that the bill be read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, moments ago, I asked this body to take up and pass two common-sense pieces of legislation in response to the terrorist attack in Paris. The first, the Expatriate Terrorist Act, is legislation that I introduced over a year ago, attempted to pass over a year ago, and that the Democratic Party blocked. That legislation provides that any American citizen who goes and joins ISIS, who takes up arms against America and attempts to wage jihad, by doing so forfeits his or her U.S. citizenship. Existing federal law provides for grounds of revocation of citizenship. This would add joining terrorist groups like ISIS to those grounds. Unfortunately, the Democratic Party has just objected to passing that common sense legislation. As a consequence, because of that objection, it means that the Americans, and the estimates are it could be up to or over 100 Americans have gone and joined ISIS right now, are waging jihad against America. And as a consequence of that objection, it means those ISIS terrorists can come back to America using a U.S. passport and wage jihad against this country. Attempt to murder innocent men and women in this country using a U.S. passport. That is, I believe, a profound mistake. The second legislation that I just asked this body to pass and that the Democrats just objected to is legislation that would stop President Obama and Hillary Clinton's plan to bring in tens of thousands of Syrian Muslim refugees to the United States. In light of the declaration of war from ISIS, in light of the horrific terrorist attack, in light of the admissions from the director of the FBI, who I might note President Obama appointed, Director Comey said the administration cannot vet these refugees to determine whether or not they are ISIS terrorists. Indeed, he said, since they don't have the data on which of the Syrian refugees are involved with ISIS terrorism, they can query the database. But with no information in the database, they can query over and over again until the cows come home. They don't have the information. Unfortunately, the Democratic Party, the Democratic senators in this body have chosen to stand with President Obama and his absurd political correctness, his unwillingness even to utter the words radical Islamic terrorism. The president refuses to say the words radical Islamic terrorism. Hillary Clinton refuses to say the words radical Islamic terrorism. But not only do they refuse to say the words, but they are supporting a policy of bringing tens of thousands of Syrian Muslim refugees into this country, knowing full well that we cannot vet them to determine who is coming here to wage jihad. That is a profound threat to this country, and it is my hope we should stand as one. This ought to be an area of bipartisan agreement. Now, I would note the legislation I introduced includes an exception for persecuted minorities facing genocide. Christians, Yazidis, small minorities that are facing genocide. In response to my acknowledging genocide as a different circumstance, President Obama 2 days ago in Turkey attacked me directly, said it was un-American to want to protect this country from terrorists and to want to help persecuted Christians. Then yesterday, President Obama attacked me again from Manila, saying it was offensive that I and so many millions of other Americans want to keep our children safe. Mr. President, it is neither un-American nor offensive to believe in rule of law, to believe in standing up to radical Islamic terrorism. And it is an astonishing statement that so many Democratic senators choose to stand with a president who will not confront radical Islamic terrorism. Indeed, just this week, Secretary Kerry rationalized the terrorist attack on Charlie Hebdo, saying it was understandable why they attacked Charlie Hebdo. We should not be acting as apologists for radical Islamic terrorists. The very first obligation of the commander-in-chief is to keep this nation safe. And I will say, any official that is responsible for bringing people in that they do not know if they are radical Islamic terrorists will bear responsibility for the consequences of their action. ISIS has been plain. They intend to murder as many Americans as possible. They intend to carry out terror attacks like happened in Paris. They intend to carry them out here. This common sense legislation would have helped protect this nation, but I'm sorry to say the Democratic Party is objecting to it. I believe we should put America first, protecting America first. Unfortunately, my friends on the other side of the aisle are blocking that effort. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I understand there's a limited amount of time.
There are 7.5 minutes remaining on the Democratic side.
I thank the distinguished chair. I'm worried in this country that we hear rhetoric that is dangerous and it's time to stop, that it shames the very nature of what America is. We hear ideas that they're wrong. I would say they're deeply anti-American. My grandparents, my Italian grandparents, my Irish great-great-grandparents heard some of these kind of things, some of this rhetoric when this country was saying they shouldn't come here. Don't allow these papists into the United States. Don't allow these Irish that are opposed to the rule of Great Britain in their island, that they actually stood up and fought against Great Britain. And the words back then, like some of the words today, come from a place of fear and hatred. I don't want to stand by quietly and see the victims of terrorism and torture be demonized just so people would have a talking point for the local evening news. We're better than this. Now, the bill that my colleague, the junior senator from Texas, introduced an hour ago would prevent virtually all nationals of Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen from refugee protection, regardless of how much they've suffered at the hands of terrorists and despots. Women fleeing gang rapes, children fleeing horrors we cannot even imagine, they would be closed off. You know, a few weeks ago, the world came together stunned and heartbroken over the image of a 3-year-old Syrian child's lifeless body washed up on a Turkish beach. His tragic death focused our attention on the desperate plight of so many Syrians who fled the horror of ISIS and Bashar al-Assad. We call it the humanitarian issue of the day. Wait, how many images of our Statue of Liberty and our proud history as a land of refuge for those fleeing persecution is brought forward? I heard so many on this floor, as well as commentators in the news. But those who call now to slam our doors on even properly vetted Syrian and other refugees should remember that the people we will shut out are those very children who touched our hearts just weeks ago. Of course, we're horrified by what happened in Beirut and Paris. And we need an effective, thoughtful strategy for countering ISIS and other terrorist organizations. That's what we should be debating, because what we've done so far is not working. We should be talking about how more countries should be involved in this fight. ISIS is our enemy. The people fleeing ISIS are not. In fact, we've had discussions, among other things that can be done, You could have somebody who's on a terrorist watch list, but they're in this country legally. They can go to a gun show. They can buy all the automatic weapons they want. They break no law. They can buy all the ammunition they want. They break no law. They can go to the store that one of the greatest terrorists this country faced, the man who did the Oklahoma City bombing, and buy the components of a bomb. They break no law. These are the things we ought to be discussing. So I reserve my time. I yield the floor.
Time is remaining on each side.
3 minutes. 3 minutes on the Democratic side and 2 minutes on the Republican side.
Okay. Do you wish to speak? Go ahead. Mr. President.
The Assistant Democratic Leader.
Mr. President, let me say at the outset that the initial unanimous consent request made by the junior senator from Texas was a bill which he had pending before the Senate Judiciary Committee today. He did not attend that meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I wish he had. And I think we should have all been there if we wanted to take this up and to debate it. I objected on behalf of myself and Senator Leahy, and the senator has spoken to the reason for that objection. Let me address the second part of this bill relative to refugees. We will reflect in years to come about what happened in this world in the last week and 10 days. We will reflect on the terrible tragedy that occurred in Paris, France, and in Beirut and other nations that was led by the ISIS terrorists. We will reflect on those poor victims who died as a result of their terrorist acts. And we will also reflect on acts of heroism and wisdom that emerged from this terrible tragedy. Heroism on the ground in Paris and other places for those who defied these terrorists and those who risked their lives to bring those responsible to justice. And the wisdom and compassion shown by leaders around the world not to exploit this situation. When President Hollande of France announced that his country would receive 35,000 refugees after this attack, he made it clear that he would not hold those innocent, helpless refugees accountable for the terrible misdeeds of these terrorists. When the nation of Canada said that they would accept thousands of refugees even after the Paris attack, they showed the wisdom and good sense to differentiate those helpless victims of terrorism around the world who were seeking refuge on our shores from those who perpetrated these terrorist acts. And listen to the debate on Capitol Hill. Listen to the unanimous consent request made this morning by the junior senator from Texas. It is not consistent with that ethic. It is not consistent with those values. To say that we will only accept refugees who are the victims of genocide would close the doors to Cuban refugees who came to the United States trying to escape all of communism and what it meant to their families. It would have closed the doors to Soviet Jews persecuted in that country who were looking for freedom and came to the United States as refugees. And I can list countless others who were not the victims of genocide, but they were the victims of persecution. They were from war-torn countries. They were the victims, as Senator Leahy has said, of gang rape and terrorism. Listen to what has been said on the other side of the rotunda and in this chamber today. It does not merit the kind of appreciation of American values which we insist on when we make these critical decisions. In time of war, in time of attack, sometimes rash decisions are made. I predict in the course of history, as people in the future reflect on what happened in the United States Senate and the House of Representatives this week, they will hope that saner voices will prevail.
Senator's time has expired. The senator from Texas.
Mr. President, the senator from Vermont spoke against overheated rhetoric, and in the very next breath accused me of being anti-American, echoing the attack President Obama gave standing on the soil of Turkey. Let me say, speaking the truth is not terrorism. My Democratic friends invoked their Irish and Italian grandparents. Well, when my Irish and Italian grandparents came to this country, They did not pose a terror threat because they were not seeking to murder innocent citizens. When my Cuban father came as a refugee, he was not a terror threat seeking to murder innocent citizens. And this is an example of the Democratic Party's refusal to acknowledge the qualitative difference. Perhaps if they cannot see it, they can hear it. Because Abu al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, in 2009, the Obama administration released him. As he was being released, Abu al-Baghdadi turned to Army Colonel Kenneth King and said, "See you in New York." ISIS intends to murder Americans, and if the Democratic Party cannot distinguish between ISIS terrorists and Irish and Italian and Jewish and Cuban immigrants, then they are ignoring reality. I would note that the Expatriate Terrorist Act is very, very similar to legislation that was introduced in 2010 by Democratic Senator Joe Lieberman and Senator Scott Brown, both of whom apparently, under the Senator from Vermont's view, are un-American as well. I would note that at the time, then Senator Hillary Clinton said about legislation virtually identical to my legislation, quote, "United States citizenship is a privilege. It is not a right. People who are serving foreign powers, or in this case foreign terrorists, are clearly in violation of the oath which they swore when they became citizens." And yet President Obama and the senator from Vermont apparently now consider Hillary Clinton's statement to be un-American. It is the essence of being American to say the commander-in-chief should protect the safety and security of this country. And I would note the assistant Democratic leader invoked President Hollande in France. President Hollande has said he would support stripping French citizenship. We should protect ourselves every bit as much as the other nations on earth.